that bears the skies serves not to rule thy native own. With matchless beauty crowned, and manly hearts to guard the fair.